Welcome back to Navigating Carbon, your compass to carbon management. As always, I'm your host, Deb Ryan, and in this latest episode, I was thrilled to sit down with Tisha Schuller. Tisha is the CEO and founder of Adamantine Energy, and they provide clients with strategies to turn decarbonization into real action. She hosts the Energy Thinks podcast and has also written multiple books on the topic of decarbonization. So I was thrilled to really pick her brain about her latest book, The Moment. Tisha is one of the preeminent voices in the oil and gas decarbonisation space, and I was really excited to pull apart her thinking about what's going on in the space right now. If you enjoy our conversation, please like the podcast, and if you want to stay on top of all upcoming episodes, make sure you subscribe to the feed. But for now, sit down and enjoy my conversation with Tisha.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Navigating Carbon. Today I'm joined by Tisha Schuller. Tisha, thank you so much for joining me today. So excited to talk to you.
Here. Thank you for having me.
There's so much to talk about. You've been working in the ESG decarbonization space for a long time, and so I'm really keen to get your thoughts and really dive into a number of topics. But before we get going, do you want to tell us, you're the CEO and founder of Adamantine Energy. Tell us about Adamantine and what it's all about.
Yeah, this April we're going to celebrate our 10th anniversary, which is amazing. And essentially, we've been working with the oil and gas industry on the future of industry, and that changes really every year. It's changing right now, as I'm sure we'll discuss. But that can be everything from what projects are they trying to get built. So how do they need to engage with communities? What are the processes through which you have to get permitted? You have to get approvals. But also it's all the things that are emerging in innovation. So any way that we're reducing the carbon intensity of oil and gas processes and products, and anything that's what we call oil and gas adjacent. So things that are moving into the decarbonization space, geothermal, direct air capture, CCS, these are all things that we work with companies on at a strategic level, and then how to implement effectively over time. Anything that essentially pushes or carries the industry forward. At the moment, there's a lot in flux. I'm sure we'll discuss it. And it's actually a very exciting time.
Yeah. It's one thing that I say a lot is that the way that we, the oil and gas industry, and really all industrials are doing business is changing. And that's, I think Adamantine captures that really well. So let's stick with that for a little bit. Like you said, you're celebrating 10 years, which is amazing. What's changed? And more interestingly, I think, what's really surprised you over the last 10 years with how the business is changing?
I guess the thing that would surprise me is that this theme of change is always present. And so if you think about 150 years of oil and gas production, it's like this is an industry that is continually evolving, continually innovating. And so it's actually a misperception out in the world, people that don't know us, who don't understand that we've been entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial spirit and innovators for 150 years. We have to be competitive, to be ever evolving, to meet the expectations of our customers, of our communities. So it's interesting, like what's changed everything constantly. And the thing that surprises me is just the nonstop pace of innovation. Like when I started as the CEO of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, so that's about 15 years ago, my first day there was a peak oil conference. So that just tells you in 15 years, right? Like we were going, oh, we're going to run out of oil, to then, within a couple of years, the shale revolution, to today, like, people are saying peak demand, and that's a whole thing we could have a really interesting conversation around. So the only thing we can count on is that this is an industry that will innovate to meet the expectations and the demands of the public. And I think that's both what makes this interesting and, of course, unnerving. Like you never know if you get. It's kind of like when you have a baby, and like if they're sleeping through the night, and you're like they're sleeping. It's like don't count on it, And then they're awake all night, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna die. They're not sleeping, and then it's like don't count on it. It's like whatever's happening. The one thing you can be sure of is it's not going to stay like this. It's going to evolve. And so whether it's the politics, the innovation, the what customers demand, what communities demand. These things are always going to change. And so sort of staying on our toes, staying at the front of what's next, that's what keeps us successful and keeps us, I think, keeps it interesting.
And would you say, like for me as well, I think for companies that are really successful, have you seen that the ones that are thinking through these things strategically and not just being like, woe is me, this regulation's changed or whatever, but the ones that are constantly evolving, like, are they the ones that have also, you've seen be really successful in this as well?
There's a couple elements to that. So one is, I mean, what you're kind of describing, and we all know this from our personal lives, is like, do you take adversity and say, where's the opportunity in this, right? Like the most successful people look at all challenging situations and say, I am resilient. What is the opportunity in this? And people who are sort of a victim mentality, like, oh, whoever they're mean to us. They say we're bad. They say, like, if you have that mindset, it's just going to be really hard to be successful. And so the best companies are essentially continually reinventing themselves to meet the demands of their customers, reinventing themselves to meet the demands of their communities, that they need to operate in. And then to evolve with like, well, where is this energy stuff going? Like if whatever we're doing today, we're not going to be doing it in 10 years. Like that's for sure. And so I think a lot of it is the culture and sort of stance of a company. When they have a leader that's dynamic, that's meeting the world where it is with, an engaging, uplifting mindset, that's key. Now, the other thing that's key though, is a kind of continuity, right? A kind of like even keelness. If these investments that oil and gas companies have to make, they have to pay out over 20, 30 years. So we can't be ping-ponging around like, knuckleheads. So there has to be a kind of trajectory that is conveyed with confidence that will be resilient against the political swing. So I'm sure we'll touch on like what the world is demanding of the industry yesterday and today. But one thing that we do, because we work in ESG, we work in community engagement, we work on environmental justice, we work on words that people don't want to talk about right now, like, oh, diversity, equity, and inclusion, And here's
bad word right now, yeah.
Right. But here's the thing: if you tie your company strategy to material business interests, to some strategy that's longer than 5 years, it might be 10 and it might be 30. But if you tie these initiatives to the material business interests, then you're not going to be overreacting to every change in administration. So there's kind of there is a positioning like on your toes. We have to innovate. Things are going to be changing. That's one key element. But the other key element is a kind of steadfastness. Like we're thinking the long term. We're not going to overcorrect either way. Yeah. And those are the two qualities that ultimately lead to successful companies. And you could look backwards at the biggest, most successful companies today and see that kind of consistency.
Yeah, I like that. And because I feel like we are, again, in this sort of like headline world, and I'm just as guilty of only reading headlines, right? Like we're very reactionary. And so I like your framing on that of like being aware, but being, seeing it for the long term and staying the course. So
it speaks to, so in the work we do, we don't recommend that every company do every cool initiative, right? We don't think every company should be investing 30% of their capital into some kind of like oil and gas adjacent solution. It's just not appropriate. A lot of this is about picking the things that are on the front edge, the things that are like maybe even politically demanded or politically viable. It's like, well, pick the ones that make sense for your location. Maybe you're in a blue state. So some of these things showing some consistency around blue state things is going to be really intelligent. So being thoughtful about what you take on, and why, because of your location, because of your type of business, that's going to create that kind of continuity in strategy. And especially at a moment right now where it feels like the world is like changing so fast. Companies that had a clear strategy and didn't overcorrect the other way before are just in a much better position. Then their strategy isn't politicized.
I love that. And speaking about rate of change, in your last book, Real Decarbonization, which everyone should read, and I think I interviewed you about that book a couple of years ago, one of the things you talk about in that book is the pendulum swing around this in terms of the rate of change. And I think at the time when you and I spoke, it was just after the Russian invasion. And so we'd seen this huge swing globally with, everyone was like carbon markets are the way to go. And then the invasion happened and everyone dumped all their carbon and ESG was dead and stuff like that. both generally here in the US and the clients that you work with, and even globally, like where do you think we are on that pendulum swing right now as you look here?
I mean, there's undoubtedly the election of November 2024 in the U.S. heralded just a dramatic political change. Now, interestingly, we don't want to overcorrect for how the world feels right now because it still was almost half the electorate is still liberal leaning in the US. And so it's like we don't want to say, 90% of the world now thinks differently. It's not that, even though it feels like that in a moment. But what it did is it created an opportunity, I think, because the conversation around energy and climate had become so dominated by what I think of is the myth of an easy energy transition, that what I would say, this overcorrection to maybe being anti anything climate or anti anything emissions reductions, but that does create an opening for our industry, which is to say we can start having some conversations grounded in reality that were very difficult to have before. I live and work in Colorado, and in Colorado, it's very difficult to say there are things that our legislature is requiring of our utilities and energy companies that is not currently possible with technology. That's like an almost impossible conversation to have. Well, I think in the next 2 years, it's going to be a lot easier conversation to have. So sometimes as the pendulum swings, if we don't swing with it, we can look at what new fields does this open up for us to engage with stakeholders, engage with community members, engage with customers. And so that's how I think about this moment. There is, in fact, the pendulum is swinging wildly. And this 4-year pendulum was quite dramatic.
Yeah.
But if we want to be successful, we don't go with it. We observe, and then we ask ourselves what opportunities does this create for my business, for my projects, and especially for how I engage with my stakeholders, particularly the stakeholders that feel alienated at this moment.
I like that.
Yeah, one of the things I always tell my my employees that haven't worked with the oil and gas industry is when times are tough, if you stick with the oil and gas industry, we remember forever, right? Like when oil goes to $20, like the consulting firms or the academics that stick with the industry, it's like when oil goes back up to 70, we're like, yeah, you were with us when times were hard. Well, we have to remember that attitude for, ENGOs, climate organizations, Democrats writ large. Like people are feeling a little abandoned right now. And so companies that can have some steadfastness to their relationships, to the ways they engage with this humongous group of stakeholders, they're going to win a lot of hearts and minds in this moment by staying the course. So that's one of the opportunities that opens up right now.
Yeah. I love your framing of the myth of an easy energy transition. I think it's something I've had a lot of conversations with people about this very sort of one track thinking of like, you're either in oil and gas or you're in the climate kind of space, but you can't be both. And that's crazy. And one of the things that you wrote it on LinkedIn recently, you wrote a post about really how finding the two kind of sides of this conversation, whether it's like, if you're going to write for more of a liberal leaning book, it's like anti-oil and gas, or if it's going to be for oil and gas, it's like, how you got rid of all of that. And it's not that black and white. So can you kind of like dissect that for me and for the audience as well, of like what you're really seeing in that space right now and that rhetoric?
The thing that I think is most important for those of us who I think live in an energy-centric world, like we understand science, we understand the limits of physics, we are interested in data and data analytics. Like we want to have conversations around energy and climate in that context. Well, for most people, the conversations they want to have around energy and climate are very politically identity driven. They're either like, I'm a good Republican, to just create a caricature, and I'm like pro whatever, oil and gas and much energy and affordability, or I'm a good liberal and I'm pro addressing climate, which means getting off those fossil fuels. And people hold these understandings very lightly, but they have big emotional, there's a lot of emotion tied to it. So if I come in and say, let me tell you my science and data around your view of the world, people just are going to reject me out of hand. So a lot of the way we encourage our clients to work with their, what we call climate-centric stakeholders, is to understand how the world looks to them. And understanding that a climate-centric stakeholder has an identity tied to being a good person, and part of being a good person is being anti-fossil fuels. This is just something to understand. It's a different point of entry, and then we can try to figure out, okay, what is this person receptive to hearing? In what way could I build their trust in me and my work so that I could have a more substantive conversation about this? Coming in with facts and data actually just makes people double down on how they see the world. So this is a lot of how we engage in this moment. Now, what's really interesting about this moment, the moment that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about, is anywhere that the myths of an easy transition are starting to show, like price spikes, rolling blackouts, the data center demand exceeding our ability to create generation. These are all openings. These are all opportunities. Not to come in and say, we told you the energy transition was hard, but to say, okay, you have new information now. Can we have a new conversation about it?
I like that.
And that's how we want to engage. And so the opportunity is only here to engage with climate-centric stakeholders if we engage differently as well. So that's what I spent a lot of time thinking about. And right now I'm working on materials that are, how can we talk about the myth of an easy energy transition to climate-centric stakeholders in a way that's appealing to them, that puts their interests first. And it doesn't mean we just say it's impossible. It means we say it's possible, maybe on a different time frame, maybe with different partners like the oil and gas industry. So that's how I've been thinking about this. And I think we're having a generational opportunity to engage differently. So all this chaos that's happening at the moment, actually, of course, there's opportunity in it. How are we going to seize it?
I really love so much to unpack there, because you are writing a book. You said you've been working on a lot of material, and it is called The Moment, if I'm correct in that. So I assume it's going to be around this conversation, or do you want to elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's exactly that. So the moment is all the forces laying bare that an energy transition will be neither easy nor free. But it's written for an oil and gas audience. But to inform how we can talk to these climate-centric stakeholders. And I will tell you, it's a challenging book to write because we haven't figured out how to do this well. No one has. Like if there was a playbook out there that said, then we would have seen Exxon and, all the super majors winning over hearts and minds around the world to how wonderful and helpful we're going to be in the energy transition. So I'm really trying to go at it from a completely novel perspective, which is what are ways in which we can work with climate-centric stakeholders that will change this dynamic, that will bring down the temperature on polarization, that will actually introduce, we are going to have some hard conversations. I call it the 3 T's: time frame, telling the truth about how hard this is going to be, and trade-offs. Like every energy source has trade-offs. So these are hard conversations. If you've been living maybe your whole adult life with the myth of an easy energy transition, this is a hard conversation to have. So really thinking about how we're going to participate in a way that can change these dynamics. It's an ambitious undertaking, but I'm excited about it. I think there's a window. I think there's a couple-year window that is a generational opportunity for our industry.
I love that. And you talked a little bit before about like when we do see things like the rolling blackouts and all this kind of stuff, that the oil and gas industry's automatic response. And I've seen this, everyone knows I'm from the oil and gas industry as well. It is that like, see, we told you, you need all the energy and stuff. And so I love what you're talking about in terms of how do we not, that some of that feels very condescending and people don't like that either. And so I love what you're talking about in terms of how do we reframe it? How do we look at the opportunities and things like that? I think it's really important. And it's definitely, like you said, it's definitely missing.
And it's I'm not immune to it. I just want to say to your audience, my first response is like, told you. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to like ping that response, put a pin in it, and then think about what would be effective, right? We do this every day in all our interpersonal relationships with people we care about. We'd like to say like, I told you to change the
I was right. I told you so.
But we didn't. Right. And so there's a little bit about why would we stop that I told you so response? It would be because we see the opening, we see the opportunity for transformation, and we're more interested in progress than fighting. Now, that's a big ask, right? We have to be more interested in progress than fighting. And culturally, right now, we're more interested in fighting than progress. So I challenge us to be more interested in progress.
I like that. So as we look to the next 3 to 8-ish kind of years, that sort of like short to medium term horizon, like what are you most frustrated or worried about as we go forward?
Yeah, the thing, of course, I mean, I'm such a Pollyanna. The thing that bums me out the most is polarization and the high temperature of everything right now. That it's just it's very dehumanizing, right? Like as an industry, we can dehumanize our critics. We sort of caricature them as paid activists or this or that. And then of course the industry is caricatured like we're a Muppet movie villain, like nonstop. And that's just that is what distresses me the most. So my response to that distress is to say, I want to change it. I want us. And like, what do you do in any conflict? Like I put the burden on us, the industry, to take the high road, to lead by example, to create the new kinds of conversations, and to meet people where they are, even if they're condescending and even if they want to caricature us. Let's just refuse to play that part again and again and again. So that's how I engage in it. I think it's the most dangerous thing happening right now. And the commitment to the fight on both sides, like you see it in activism too, climate activism. Like I would rather exclude solutions than make progress. Like they won't say that, but that's at the heart of a lot of what's going on right now. And then we do the same in our own way. So we just have to be more committed to reducing emissions, to increasing abundance, to increasing reliability and affordability of energy. These are things that require us to show up as the best version of ourselves and the best version of our industry.
I love that. So we're getting to the end. So I just wanted to, again, thank you for coming on, but I wanted to see like, what final thoughts do you have for the listeners and the audience? Like, what are you excited about? What are you curious to see how it turns out? And yeah, any final thoughts for everyone?
I mean, right now, this is really an interesting time. It feels as unknown as COVID did, right? Like it's kind of that same time of year. And it's like, what is going to happen? And what's going to happen in America? What's going to happen in the world? Just the political pendulum swings are just bouncing around. And so what I'm excited about is as many of us as possible keeping our wits about us and saying like, all right, I had a good strategy 6 months ago. I still have a good strategy. I'm going to stay the course, and I'm going to just bring kindness and giving others the benefit of the doubt, all in service of this idea of making progress. Like at Adamantine, we say all the time, progress over perfection. And at this moment, that's as true as ever. Like how we show up, how we engage, how we meet the uncertainty of this moment in time for our businesses, for our public discourse and dialogue. I think that I'm excited that I have seen again and again, like in COVID, my business grew just spectacularly after COVID, but when it was happening, it felt like the end of the world. And so in many ways, it's like, I'm excited to see, well, what comes out of this? Like, is there a renaissance of engagement with the oil and gas industry with a broader set of stakeholders? Is there actually a renaissance in the affordability, availability of abundant, cleaner energy? Like, this could be really exciting. This could be a really exciting chapter. And the more chaotic, the more opportunity abounds, as long as we keep our wits about us. So that's what I'm excited about.
I love that. Well, Tisha, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Deb, thanks so much for having me.